Hey everybody, welcome to this lesson on rhythm and groove between drum set and bass. This is going to be a great video where we look at some of the most popular songs of the last 70 years. I'm going to play them for you with everything isolated except drum set, bass, and lead vocal. And that's going to allow us to really hear what the rhythm section's doing on some of these songs. And along the way, I'm going to talk through some concepts and explain this in terms of 4 big picture patterns that I want you to be aware of. 4 common formula that drummers and bassists and producers and arrangers use when they're trying to craft a really effective song. Now, for this video, I want to present kind of a thesis statement that's going to give us an outline of how to think of this stuff. Here's my thesis statement. Since at least 1950, every major producer of the really popular genres of music in the US, I'm talking about things like pop, rock, country, electronic, and dance music, a lot of funk and groove music, even though the rhythm might get more sophisticated there. In all those genres, producers across the board have thought about the rhythm section in terms of one question, and that question is, how are the kick drum and the bass working together? As bassists, we really want to hone in on what the kick drum is doing. So as we listen through all this today, that's our framework. I'm going to talk about things in terms of the kick and the bass. We're going to notice when they line up. We're going to notice when they don't line up. And along the way, we're going to recognize some common patterns that you can then take away and use in your music. Let's get started. So the first category of things I want to talk about, it's based on a timeless classic, enormously powerful drum beat. The drum beat is this. Okay, if you're underwhelmed, don't be. I know it's simple, but this is actually a really challenging thing to play with conviction. And this is the basic backbone of a million hit records. This is called the money beat. And the reason it's called that is drummers back in the day would joke that if you wanted to make some money as a drummer, you had to get really good at playing that beat without the temptation of adding a bunch of fills and flair, sticking just to that beat. So if a drummer plays a money beat, which they're going to do in a whole lot of different situations, what are we supposed to do as bassists? Let me talk you through 3 common approaches to playing bass over a money beat. We'll hear a couple examples of each. The first approach is to unison with the drum set. When we talk about unison in music, we mean 2 instruments playing the exact same rhythm the same way. Nobody's playing any extra notes. Nobody's leaving any notes out. They're playing the exact same rhythm. In the money beat, what we have is a kick drum on beats 1 and 3 and a snare drum in 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, kick, snare, up, down, up, down. Think of the pendulum on a clock going back and forth. Kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. This is timeless. It's kind of the simplest, most effective way to divide up time, and that's all rhythm is. Now, I said that we could play unison, and think about our thesis again. We're focused on the kick drum. We're going to focus on unison hits with the kick drum, and I already said it's happening on 1 and 3, so we're going to play our bass on 1 and 3. Let's listen to an example of a true unison, where the drummer and the bassist are locked in. Nobody's doing anything extra. They're both hitting 1 and 3. Bass player's just kind of hitting the root note. And that's all they're doing.
They took my saddle in Houston, broke my leg in Santa Fe.
Now, we've talked about unisons, but I bet you're wondering, do I have to just play the root note? Can I play anything else? Yeah, of course you can. You can keep the rhythm the same, only playing on 1 and 3. But what if you did the root and the 5th? You would quickly stumble on the sound of classic country music. Now, we probably all know this already, but it is a money beat, kick on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, and bass playing strict unison just with root and 5th. So let's listen to an example of it.
When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot.
All right, so what can a bassist do over a money beat? Number one, they can play some kind of unison rhythm. Number two, they can take it in more of a rock direction by playing eighth notes. Let's listen to a different money beat. Bass player is still basically just playing the root note of the chords, but this time eighth notes.
The bumping in the strange line. You're going through a tight one. You keep the listen at mine. Let's creep up.
Okay, just by adding more notes, not more pitches. They're not playing more notes out of the scale or something like that. They're just playing more notes with their right hand. The feel is totally different. Now, you again might be wondering, can I start to experiment with different pitches? And of course you can. You can take a money beat, playing steady eighth notes on the bass, but creating a melody with it, where you're changing pitch. You're not just playing the root note. And you're quickly going to stumble on the sound of a lot of electronic music. Here comes an example that we all know, but I want you to think about it in a way you probably haven't before. Notice the concepts at play. Money beat on the drums, steady eighth notes on the bass, just changing the pitch.
Then heavy hair turned with the ice dream of being the one who would dance on the floor around.
All right, what's the third thing that a bass player could do over a money beat? Well, the option that I see is syncopations. Now, syncopation in music is kind of a big topic. I'm not going to get too into it, but I will link some lessons below where I explain it in detail. What we're talking about, though, is rhythms that emphasize the offbeats. So if we're counting eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, we're talking about rhythms that hit the and more often than the numbers. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and, etc., etc. Let's check out an example and then I'll say a few more things.
But I know that it's too late now. Now there's nothing I can do. So I try to laugh about it. Cover.
Now, you might notice this seems like it might break a rule. Remember, I said the thesis here is that producers for the last 80 years have been thinking, how do the kick drum and the bass work together? And now we have this example where the bass and kick drum aren't playing very many of the same notes. Here's the solution to help you make sense of why this works. It's not just random. Something very important is happening. In these syncopated kind of bass lines over a money beat, you are almost always going to hear the bassist get back on the beat for beat one, for the downbeat. I often encourage students to think about this as coming from the world of Afro-Cuban and Brazilian music, where you hear a lot of complicated rhythms that might sound like this. Or like this. What all those kinds of rhythms have in common, though, the beginning and end of the phrase is not syncopated. It's right on the beat. All the syncopation is happening in the middle. If I slow it down, on the beat, syncopated. On the beat, syncopated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to hear bass players doing that kind of stuff over a money beat. So they're protecting the one, the downbeat, which is so critical, and that's what makes it work. If you were to only play syncopated notes, you would have a much harder time making it work. I won't say it's never been done, but it's a lot harder. So let's listen to one more example, and this time, don't just notice the syncopations in the bass, notice how they get back to the downbeat.
The call and the suffering from the world will go. Does anybody know?
What can a bass player do over a money beat? They can play unisons, they can play eighth notes, or they can play syncopations. And I'm going to suggest that about 95% of the time, you're going to hear them do one of those three things. Now, let's move on to our next big picture pattern. Remember, we're looking at 4 patterns. That's just number 1. So the next pattern is based on a slightly different drum groove. And I mean slightly. It sounds like this. We've got our money beat plus an extra note. It's no longer a money beat, it's now something else, but notice how similar they are. In the money beat, we had the kick on 1 and 3. Here, we have an additional kick note on the and of 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Cymbals and snare are the same. And again, when we're talking about arranging for the kinds of bands that we're talking about, you really don't have to think that much about cymbals and snare usually. A drummer is going to kind of fill those out on their own. The producer is usually more focused on what the kick drum is doing. All right, so what can we do over this kind of beat? Well, again, I see 3 things that I want to highlight. First of all, we can do unisons. Now, true unisons, where we're playing that exact rhythm, it's a little bit rare. You don't hear it a ton, but you will hear it sometimes, and it does work. Let's check out an example. There's a true unison, but what's more common over this groove 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 is to do unison plus. What I mean by that is we're still playing the unison, but we're going to add a few notes on the bass, pulling a little bit of the audience's attention back towards us and maybe creating a little bit more of a sense of motion in these chords. So the common pattern that I want to highlight, this can be done a lot of ways, but more than anything, what you're going to hear is adding some bass notes on beat 4. So now we had this rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. If I add on beat 4, we get this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, are you going to play the root on beat 4? You could, but I'll tell you, this would be a really perfect, juicy place for some passing tones, which is something I get into in a lot of my other videos. I'll link some lessons below on that in case you don't know what I'm talking about. Now, there's 2 things that you'll tend to hear, and I'm going to play an example of each. Sometimes you'll hear people playing this variation every measure, where they're always adding a note on beat 4. It would sound like this.
You got that something I think you'll understand when I...
There's variation 1. We've got our basic rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we're also adding a note on 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Something that you'll also hear a lot though, because that might be kind of a lot from the bass, you'll often hear a back and forth A-B structure, where on the first measure, the bassist just does a true unison, and on the second measure, they add a note on beat 4, creating a 2-measure phrase. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Let's check out an example of that.
The phone rings in the middle of the night. My body yells, "What you gonna do with your life?" Oh.
All right, so what's a bass player do over this boom, ta, boom, boom, ta rhythm? They can play a true unison. More often, they're probably going to play unison plus, maybe adding a note on beat 4. The other variation of this that I want to make sure to point out, this is sometimes called like the Springsteen beat because Bruce Springsteen really loved this. He didn't invent it. It came out from earlier music, but he really crystallized it. We keep that kick drum pattern, but here the drummer does something different with the snare. And instead of playing the snare on 2 and 4, they just play the snare on 4. It sounds like this. Let's just hear it for a second. Now Now, you're probably thinking of some songs right away. For example, maybe you're thinking of this song.
The night we met, I knew
And in that example, bassist is really largely just doing some unison stuff. And we can hear a more updated example too from a few years later. Okay, so we're halfway through our 4 big patterns. We talked about a money beat and 3 options that bass players are going to use over it. We talked about boom, ta, and 2 or 3 options bass players are going to use over that. What's next? Well, now we're going to look at this and we're going to flip the script. Instead of thinking drums first, like here's a drum groove, what does the bass do over that? We're going to do it the other way around, which sometimes happens in a studio. Here's a common bass pattern, what might the drums do over it? And this common bass rhythm that I'm referring to, it's going to be our 3rd big pattern, is this rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. It's still related to the money beat, isn't it? We've got a rhythm where we're hitting on 1 and 3, but we're also hitting on the 8th note before each of those. A pickup leading us into 1 and 3. It creates this kind of like rolling, like perpetual motion kind of feel. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 2 and 3 and 4. This shows up a lot in bass, and drums actually might do a number of different things over it. So this is something where you can try this over different drum grooves, or if you're in the process of arranging a song, you might try a bass line like this and let the drummer create some options to it. Let's check out our first couple examples. So here's what it sounds like to have this rhythm and use a true unison.
Now and then when I see her face, she takes me away to that special place. And if I stay
you are the apple of my eye.
Now, is it always going to be a unison? Is the drummer always just going to line that kick right up with our rhythm? No, there's some other things they might do. First of all, they might play in a more improvisational style where they sometimes lock in and sometimes are just kind of talking, speaking a little bit on the drums, even though the bass is staying consistent. Here's what that sounds like.
seems I'm not alone in being alone. 100 million times away. Looking
Notice how the bass rhythm is still staying the same? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Don't lose the plot here. That's the plot, is that bass rhythm. The drums might do something else too. They might add some 16th notes in the mix to give it a little bit more of like a modern hip-hoppy feel.
Cool place, and they say it gets colder. You're bundled up now, wait till you get older. But the media men beg to differ, judging by the hole in the satellite picture. The ice we skate.
Different drums, same bass. Now, something else they can do is they can scale it back. And the drums can play something simple, like they could even play a money beat with the bass doing that rhythm. Here's what that sounds like.
If you wanna be my lover, you gotta get with my friends. Make it last forever. Friendship never ends. If you
What's our 4th big pattern? Well, it's one of the other grooves that gets talked about endlessly, and it's 4 on the floor. So you probably know 4 on the floor refers to the drum set, where we've got, snare on 2 and 4 like usual, and the kick drum playing all of the quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We were talking about syncopations a little bit earlier. This is like the least syncopated beat possible. Just all of the kicks right on the quarter notes, nothing else happening in the kick drum. What might a bass player do over this? Well, there's several options, and it kind of depends what direction you want to take the song in. So first of all, you could just play unison. That's been true for all of these, right? A drummer and bassist can always play unison. On 4 on the Floor, you won't necessarily hear that a ton, but it does happen. Here's a couple examples of that.
Here's a world within itself, with a language we all understand.
I can't seem to face up to the facts. I'm tense and nervous and I can't relax.
Now, 4 on the Floor is sort of best known from disco music, and notice that if we play unison with it, it doesn't sound disco at all. To get in that direction, we're going to need to add a little bit more in the bass. So one thing we can do to start to move in that direction is we can get more syncopated. We can take those same kinds of rhythms we talked about over the money beat. Remember when I talked about sort of Afro-Cuban? The beginning and maybe the end of the phrase are on the beat, the middle is syncopated. We can use those same kind of rhythms over 4 on the Floor. It'll sound like this.
I've got no one to blame, but every time I feel late.
What if you want to take it even further? What if you want true disco? Not like kind of disco, you want true disco. Well, we're going to get even more syncopated. We're probably going to get even more virtuosic, meaning we're just playing more notes, we're just squeezing more in. But one thing is true, and that's what I want to highlight. We're going to hit that downbeat. And this comes from the world of James Brown. James Brown, has all these bass lines where you hit the downbeat and then the rest is kind of up for grabs. We can do the same thing with 4 on the Floor. We've got to hit that downbeat so that the whole thing stays together. That's kind of what keeps the ship afloat. That's the difference between the plate holding the food being solid and the food being on the ground. We're going to hit the downbeat, and then we're just going to get real funky and syncopated. And here's a couple examples of what that would sound like.
It's murder on the dance floor, but you better not kill the groove. Hey, 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 it's murder on the.
Don't show up, don't come out, don't start caring about me now. Walk away.
Okay, one more thought for 4 on the Floor. You might be wondering, if the bass is playing all 4 quarter notes, does that guarantee that the drummer needs to do the same thing? And actually, no, it doesn't. There are some examples, a lot of examples actually, of a bass playing quarter notes and the drummer doing something else. Let me show you 2. One thing that might often happen is the drummer might go for more of like a shuffle feel, and they might just play the kick on 1 and 3, like our money beat. This time it's swung.
You're changing your heart. You know who you are.
The drummer could also just take those steady quarter notes on the bass and just play a rock groove over it. Kind of a cool sound. Here's an example.
At the police department, I got myself a steady job. I know she tried her best to help me. She could steal.
All right, so that's it. That's our examples for today. Thanks for sticking with me and watching this. Hopefully you learned some things that you can now use in your music, your arranging and producing. Let me know what you think about this and if there are any parts of this that stand out in particular. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you soon.